I shut off the water to an entire neighborhood with one switch, and it all started because someone wanted a free pool party. The first thing I heard was the deep metallic bang under the concrete, like a pipe snapping somewhere below my feet. Then came the spray. A column of water shot up near the edge of my backyard, catching the late afternoon sun and turning into mist before crashing back down onto the patio. People were screaming. Music cut out mid-beat. Plastic cups hit the ground and rolled into puddles that were already spreading too fast to stop. I stood by the side gate, hands still on the latch, and watched it unfold like I had already seen it coming. The smell of chlorine mixed with wet grass and cheap beer filled the air. My pool. My system. My property. And somehow, none of these people thought that mattered. They were everywhere. Kids jumping off the edge. Adults crowding the shallow end with drinks in hand. Someone had set up a folding table right over the access panel I had installed 6 months ago. I recognized maybe 2 faces. The rest were strangers. Loud. Careless. Acting like this place belonged to them. It didn't. It never did. I had spent the last year rebuilding this property from the ground up. New plumbing. Reinforced lines. Independent pressure control. Not because I wanted a nicer pool. Because I needed control. Full control. But Patricia Doyle didn't care about any of that. HOA president. Self-appointed ruler of the cul-de-sac. She had that tight smile that never reached her eyes and a voice that carried like she owned every inch of land she could point at. A week ago, she stood right where I was standing now and told me my pool was wasted space if the neighborhood couldn't use it. I told her no. Simple as that. No paperwork. No negotiation. Just no. She didn't like that. So she sent emails. Printed flyers. Told everyone the pool was open for community use. Said it was approved. Said I had agreed. I didn't correct her. I didn't argue. I didn't call the cops. I just watched. Because the truth is, this pool was never just a pool. It was the control point. The one place where every line feeding this entire block passed through my land. Before splitting off into the rest of the neighborhood. Pressure valves. Flow regulators. Emergency release. All tied into a system I personally financed and legally owned. Something the HOA never bothered to check. Something Patricia never thought to question. I stepped inside slowly, shoes crunching on wet concrete as the water kept rising around the patio edges. People were backing away now. Confused. Nervous. Looking for someone to blame. Patricia was near the grill, phone in hand, already shouting orders like she could talk her way out of physics. She saw me and rolled her eyes like I was the problem. Like I had just shown up to ruin her party. Maybe I did. I looked at the control panel hidden behind the decorative wood paneling, the one her guests had leaned coolers against all afternoon without realizing what it was. I flipped it open. The hum beneath the ground shifted pitch instantly. And that's when the real damage started. The vibration under my feet turned into a low rolling pressure that I felt in my chest before I heard anything else. The system was recalibrating. Not failing. Not breaking. Doing exactly what it was designed to do when demand exceeded safe thresholds. The water spraying from the crack seam near the patio shifted direction and intensified, not like a burst pipe but like a controlled release. People stepped back fast now. Shoes slipping on wet concrete. Someone yelled for towels. Someone else grabbed their phone and started recording like this was just another viral moment. They had no idea what they were standing in the middle of. I kept my eyes on the gauge panel. Pressure climbing past 100 psi. Then 120. That was the point where the automated safety protocol kicked in across the entire line. Not just my property. The whole neighborhood grid that fed from this junction. Every sprinkler system. Every outdoor faucet. Every auxiliary line connected through the shared infrastructure I had quietly taken ownership of months ago. I heard it then. A distant series of hollow thumps echoing down the block like doors slamming in sequence. That was not doors. That was pressure valves sealing shut one after another. Patricia was still talking, still trying to control the narrative. She walked toward me, heels clicking hard against the soaked patio, pointing at the water like I had personally turned a hose on her guests. Her voice was sharp, accusing, demanding I fix it immediately. I let her finish. I let her stand there in front of everyone she invited. Then I turned the panel slightly so she could see the numbers climbing. I told her calmly that the system was now in emergency redistribution mode. I explained that unauthorized load had triggered a network-wide shutdown to prevent structural damage. She blinked at me like I had just spoken a different language. Because to her, this was a pool. To me, it was a regulated utility node tied into a legally binding infrastructure contract. The music was off now. The party energy gone. All that was left was confusion and the steady sound of water being redirected beneath our feet. Phones started buzzing. Not just one. Dozens. People checking messages. Looking around. Realizing something bigger was happening beyond my backyard. One man near the fence said his irrigation system just stopped mid-cycle. Another woman said her outdoor kitchen sink lost pressure completely. It was spreading. Exactly as designed. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the folded document I had been carrying all afternoon. Not for protection. Not for defense. For timing. I handed it to Patricia. She hesitated before taking it, like touching it would somehow admit fault. But she took it anyway. Her eyes scanned the header first. Then the seal. Then the signature at the bottom. Her expression shifted. Not anger. Not yet. Confusion turning into something heavier. I told her she should read Section 4. The part about exclusive control rights over the primary distribution junction located on privately owned land. I told her that land was mine. Purchased through a holding company she had never heard of. Approved by the county under a redevelopment clause she never bothered to review. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out. Around us, the water had stopped rising. The spray reduced to a mist. But the silence that replaced it was louder than anything before. Because now it was not about a party anymore. It was about consequences that were already in motion. Patricia's fingers tightened around the document like she could crush the words off the page and make them disappear. Her eyes moved faster now, scanning line after line, searching for something she could argue against. There was nothing there for her to fight. Every clause was clean. Every signature was valid. Every approval stamped by people who outranked her in ways she never imagined. The crowd around us had gone quiet. Not silent, but low. Whispering. Phones still in hand, but no one was filming anymore. They were reading the room. And the room had changed. I stepped past her slowly, careful not to slip on the damp concrete, and walked toward the edge of the patio where the access panel wiring connected into the secondary relay box. The hum beneath the ground stabilized into a steady, controlled tone. That meant the system had completed Phase 1. Containment was done. Now came allocation. I pressed a sequence into the panel. Not random. Not emotional. Pre-programmed weeks ago in case something like this ever happened. The numbers shifted again. Pressure rerouted. Priority lines activated. And just like that, everything feeding through my junction began to follow a new map. A map Patricia had never seen. A map the HOA never approved. Because they never knew it existed. A man near the fence checked his phone again and cursed under his breath. He said his home alert system just flagged a water disruption warning. Another voice chimed in. Then another. Within seconds, it was no longer isolated confusion. It was a pattern. Entire sections of the neighborhood were losing non-essential water access. Decorative fountains. Irrigation systems. Outdoor kitchens. All offline. Not damaged. Just cut. Legally. Automatically. According to the infrastructure priority list filed under my company's name. Patricia finally looked up from the document. Her face had changed. The confidence was gone. Replaced by something sharper. Calculation. She asked me what I had done. Not yelled. Not demanded. Asked, That was new. I told her I had not done anything. I told her the system was protecting itself from unauthorized usage. I told her this was what happened when private property was converted into public load without consent. Her lips pressed into a thin line as she glanced around at the guests she invited. They were no longer relaxed. No longer enjoying anything. They were checking their phones. Calling neighbors. Realizing their homes were being affected by a decision they did not make. The music speaker near the grill sparked back to life for a second before cutting out again as the power stabilizer adjusted to the new load conditions. Even that was tied into the system. Even that followed the rules she ignored. I walked back toward her and tapped the document lightly. I told her she should keep reading. Section 7 outlined liability transfer in the event of unauthorized community usage leading to system disruption. Her name was not on that line. But her organization's was. The HOA. Fully listed. Fully responsible. Her eyes dropped back down, slower this time. More careful. Like each word weighed more than the last. I could see it hitting her now. Not all at once. Piece by piece. The party she created had triggered a network response that extended far beyond my backyard. And every consequence that followed had a paper trail leading straight back to her decision. I reached into my pocket again and pulled out my phone. No rush. No panic. I opened a message thread and tapped one contact. The response came almost instantly. A simple confirmation. Phase 2 ready. I looked up at the neighborhood beyond my fence. Lawns that were already beginning to dry under the late sun. Sprinkler heads sitting idle. Systems waiting for permission they were not going to get anytime soon. Then I looked back at Patricia. And for the first time since she stepped onto my property, she did not look like she was in charge of anything. The air shifted before anyone said a word. Not because of the water. Not because of the silence. But because everyone there felt it at the same time. Control had changed hands. Patricia looked around like she was trying to find something solid to stand on, but every direction she turned only confirmed the same thing. This was bigger than her. Way bigger. A man near the gate walked up to me slowly, holding his phone out like proof of something he could not explain. He said his entire irrigation schedule had been wiped from the system. Not paused. Deleted. Another neighbor said her outdoor filtration system just locked her out completely. Error codes she had never seen before. I nodded once. Calm. Measured. I told them it was part of the automated compliance protocol. When unauthorized load triggers a network event, the system resets all non-essential allocations until a full audit is completed. I could see it in their faces. That word. Audit. It landed heavier than anything else. Because audits meant records. And records meant accountability. Patricia finally stepped forward again, but this time slower. Her voice dropped. Lower. Controlled. She asked me how long this would last. Not if. How long? I told her the timeline depended on the severity of the violation. And right now, based on usage logs, it was classified as a large-scale unauthorized distribution event. Her eyes narrowed slightly as she tried to process that. I could tell she was doing the math in her head. Trying to figure out how a pool party turned into something that sounded like a corporate breach report. I let her think. I let the weight settle. Then I pulled up the live system dashboard on my phone and turned the screen toward her. Rows of data. Real-time metrics. Flow percentages. Pressure mapping across the entire neighborhood grid. Red markers blinking across multiple properties. Not damage. Not destruction. Restriction. Controlled limitation of access based on compliance priority. Her name was not on the screen. But the HOA account was. Flagged. Highlighted. Under review. I told her that once an account is flagged at that level, it triggers a financial liability cascade. Not a fine. Not a warning. A recalculation of infrastructure usage fees across every connected property under that account. Her lips parted again, but this time she did not try to speak immediately. Because she understood what that meant. Not just for her. For everyone tied to the HOA. Every house. Every homeowner. Every monthly due that suddenly was not going to look the same anymore. A woman near the pool edge said her husband just texted her that their water bill projection jumped by 300% in the last 10 minutes. Another voice confirmed the same. Then another. The pattern was no longer subtle. It was visible. Measurable. Spreading. Patricia's grip on the document loosened slightly. Not because she accepted it. Because she could not hold on to the idea that this was still something she could control. I stepped closer and lowered my voice just enough so only she could hear clearly. I told her this was Phase 2. Financial containment. Designed to recover losses from unauthorized usage by redistributing costs across the responsible entity. Her eyes locked onto mine. Searching. Desperate for a gap. A loophole. Something she could use to push back. There was nothing. Because the truth she was just beginning to understand was simple. I did not build a pool. I built leverage. And the moment she opened my gate without permission, she handed me the reason to use it. Around us, the neighborhood was no longer just reacting. It was escalating. Calls being made. Questions being asked. And every answer led back to one thing. The HOA decision that started all of it. Patricia looked down at the document one more time, then back up at me. And for the first time since I met her, she did not look angry. She looked afraid of what was coming next. The first official notice did not come from me. It came from the county. A sharp digital chime echoed from multiple phones at once, cutting through the tension like a signal everyone understood. Emergency Infrastructure Advisory. Temporary service restrictions under active compliance review. It was not loud. It was not dramatic. But it was real. And it was binding. People started reading out loud in fragments. Words like surcharge, audit, redistribution, liability. Each one landing heavier than the last. Patricia's face drained of color as she pulled out her own phone and scrolled faster than I had ever seen her move. Her authority had always been built on controlling information. On being the first to know. The one who explained rules to everyone else. Now she was the last to understand what was happening, and it showed. I stayed still. Let the moment breathe. Because this was the part most people never saw coming. The shift from inconvenience to consequence. A man near the gate said his neighbor just called him. Their automated billing system had already updated. Not next month. Not next cycle. Right now. A projected infrastructure recovery fee had been applied across every property under the HOA umbrella. Not optional. Not negotiable. Calculated based on peak unauthorized load. Someone asked how much? He looked at his screen again and said the number slowly, like saying it too fast would make it worse. Thousands of dollars. Per household. The reaction was immediate. Voices rising. Not at me. At her. At the person who told them this was approved. Safe. Allowed. Patricia tried to speak. Tried to regain control of the situation with the same tone she always used. Calm. Authoritative. But it cracked halfway through her first sentence. Because the system did not care about her tone. The numbers did not respond to her voice. I stepped forward slightly and tapped the edge of the panel again. Not to change anything. Just to remind her that this was still active. Still ongoing. I told her this was only the preliminary assessment. The full audit would include infrastructure strain, redistribution loss, and emergency override activation costs. Those numbers would not be smaller. Her eyes widened slightly as she realized this was not a one-time penalty. It was a cascade. A chain reaction that would keep calculating until every variable was accounted for. A woman near the pool clutched her phone and shook her head. She said her husband just confirmed the HOA reserve fund was not even close to covering this kind of liability. Another voice added that insurance might not cover unauthorized usage events. The word unauthorized echoed again. Louder this time. Clearer. Directed. Patricia's name was not being said yet, but it was there in every glance. Every pause. Every shift in tone. I watched her shoulders drop slightly. Not dramatic. Just enough to see the weight settling in. She looked back at me, not with anger this time, but with something closer to disbelief. Like she could not accept that all of this came from one decision. One moment where she chose to ignore a boundary because it seemed small. Because it seemed like she could. I met her gaze and kept my voice steady. I told her systems like this do not react to intentions. They react to actions. And once triggered, they follow through. No exceptions. No shortcuts. Around us, the neighborhood noise was growing. Calls turning into arguments. Questions turning into demands. And every path led back to the same starting point. My gate. My pool. Her decision. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the wet concrete, and for the first time since this began, no one looked like they were at a party anymore. They looked like they were standing in the middle of a build they did not expect, and could not ignore. The second wave did not come from the ground. It came from the system behind it. My phone vibrated again, longer this time, followed by a sequence of confirmations that lined up exactly with the schedule I had set weeks ago. Compliance audit initiated. External review engaged. Third-party verification locked in. This was no longer contained within the neighborhood. It had stepped into a level where decisions could not be undone with apologies or quick meetings. Patricia's phone rang. Not a message. A direct call. She looked at the screen and hesitated before answering, like she already knew this would not be a conversation she could control. Her voice was quieter now when she spoke. More careful. She walked a few steps away from the group, but not far enough to escape the attention that had already locked onto her. Everyone was watching. Listening. Waiting for her to fix something that was already beyond her reach. I turned my screen slightly and watched the live audit feed populate. Each property under the HOA account was being evaluated in real time. Usage logs pulled. Access history reviewed. Authorization flags checked against recorded approvals. It was precise. Clinical. No emotion. Just data stacking into a structure that would decide everything that came next. A man near the fence said his neighbor just received a formal notice of service limitation pending review. Another voice confirmed they had the same notice. Not warnings. Not suggestions. Official notices with timestamps and case numbers. Patricia's voice rose slightly on the call, then dropped again. She turned her back to the group, but it did not matter. The damage was already public. The authority she used to project was dissolving in front of everyone she used to lead. I stepped closer to the panel again and rested my hand lightly against it. The vibration had stabilized completely now. The system was no longer reacting. It was executing. That was the difference most people never understood. Reaction can be stopped. Execution runs its course. Patricia ended the call and stood still for a moment. Then she turned back toward me, but slower than before. There was no anger left in her posture. Just calculation and something heavier underneath it. She asked me who I had brought into this. Not what system. Not what process. Who? That question mattered. Because it meant she finally understood this was not just about infrastructure. It was about control at a level she had never operated in. I told her the audit was being handled by a private utility compliance firm contracted through my holding company. Independent. Legally binding. And already submitted to the county for oversight. Her eyes widened slightly again. That word. County. It meant this was not staying inside HOA meetings or neighborhood discussions. It meant records. Public records. Permanent. A woman near the pool said her husband just called again. This time he sounded different. Not confused. Alarmed. Their mortgage provider had flagged the property due to sudden projected cost increases tied to infrastructure liability. That was the moment the scales shifted again. Because now it was not just about water or bills. It was about property value. Loans. Financial stability. The kind of impact that does not disappear after a weekend. The kind that follows you. Patricia took a step closer to me and lowered her voice. She asked me how to stop it. Not demand. Not command. Ask. I looked at her for a second longer than necessary. Then I told her the system does. Not stop. It resolves. And resolution depends on accountability. Her shoulders dropped just enough to show she understood exactly what that meant. Around us, the neighborhood noise had changed again. No longer scattered. Focused. Directed. Conversations were turning into something sharper. Names being said. Decisions being questioned. And every thread still led back to the same moment. The gate she opened. The authority she assumed. The line she crossed. I glanced down at my phone one more time as the next notification came through. Audit escalation approved. Financial liability assessment moving to final phase. I looked back up at Patricia, and for the first time, she did not try to speak at all. Because she finally understood that what she started with a small decision had already grown into something she could not contain, and was about to cost far more than she ever imagined. The final phase did not announce itself with noise. It arrived quietly, the way real consequences always do. My phone lit up with a clean notification. Liability assessment finalized. Distribution initiated. I did not need to open it to know what it meant. But I did anyway, just to watch the numbers settle into place. The system had finished calculating everything. Peak load. Unauthorized access duration. Redistribution strain across the network. Emergency override cycles. It was all there. Clean. Precise. And irreversible. Around me, the shift was immediate. Phones buzzed again, but this time the reactions were different. No confusion. No guessing. Just shock. A man near the fence said the updated figure out loud without meaning to. 5 digits. Per property. Not projected anymore. Applied? Locked. A woman covered her mouth as she stared at her screen. Someone else turned away and started pacing, running numbers in their head like they could find a way around it. There was no way around it. Patricia did not check her phone right away. She just stood there, staring at me like she was trying to understand how far this had really gone. I held her gaze for a second, then nodded slightly toward her hand. She looked down slowly, like she already knew what she was about to see. Her screen lit up. The same notice. The same number. But hers was higher. Because it was not just her home. It was the HOA account layered on top of it. Administrative liability. Oversight failure. Authorization breach. The system did not punish. It redistributed responsibility. And she was at the center of it. Her breath caught for a second. Not dramatic. Just enough to show the impact had landed. She looked up again, but there was nothing left to argue. No authority left to lean on. Just a chain of decisions that led here. A neighbor stepped forward and asked her directly what was going on. Not politely. Not carefully. Direct. Others followed. Questions stacking. Pressure building. Not from the system now. From the people she used to manage. She tried to speak, but the words did not come out the way they used to. Because for the first time, she did not control the outcome. I stepped back slightly, giving her space she did not know how to use. Because this part was never about me stepping in again. It was about everything she set in motion reaching its natural end. I glanced down at the panel one last time. The system was stable. Balanced. Every line running exactly where it needed to. No excess. No overload. Just order. That was always the goal. Not chaos. Not damage. Control. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the final document. The one that had not been needed until now. I held it for a second, then walked over and placed it gently on the edge of the table near her. She looked at it without touching it. Like she already understood what it was. Formal transfer of liability acknowledgement. Signature required to initiate resolution and begin restoration protocols. Without it, the system would remain in its current state until the full audit cycle completed. Weeks. Maybe longer. I did not say anything else. I did not need to. The numbers on every screen around us were already speaking louder than anything I could add. The sun had dropped lower now, the light softer, shadows longer across the wet concrete that had finally stopped glistening. The party was gone. The noise was different. Focused. Heavy. Real. Patricia finally reached for the document, her hands slower than it had ever been, and in that moment, it was clear to everyone watching that the power she thought she had was never really hers to begin with. Patricia's fingers hovered over the document for a long second before finally pressing down on the paper. The small motion felt heavier than everything that had happened before. Around her, the murmurs grew sharper. Neighbors were no longer whispering. They were comparing numbers. They were calculating totals. Some were already calling accountants. Others were opening emails from the HOA system that kept updating in real time. Every refresh made the situation more real. Patricia swallowed and picked up the pen. Her hand was not steady anymore. She glanced at me once, searching for hesitation, for doubt, for any sign that this could still be reversed. There was none. I simply watched. Calm. Still. Certain. Because the system had already moved beyond the point of negotiation. She signed. The moment the pen left the paper, my phone vibrated again. Resolution protocol initiated. That single line changed everything. The system did not forgive. It recalculated. The numbers on everyone's screens began to shift again. Lower this time, but not gone. Structured payments replaced lump sums. Long-term obligations replaced immediate collapse. It was not destruction. It was controlled fallout. And it would last for years. A man near the gate exhaled loudly as his updated balance appeared. Still high. Still painful. But survivable. Another neighbor shook his head slowly, realizing this was now part of his financial future. Patricia looked at her own screen again. Her number had changed too, but not in the same way. Hers remained the highest. Administrative liability did not dissolve. It redistributed downward, but the origin point always carried the weight. She sank slightly into the chair behind her, not dramatically, just enough to show the shift in reality had settled in. The authority she once projected was gone. In its place was responsibility. Pure and unavoidable. I stepped forward and picked up the document, folding it neatly before placing it back into my pocket. The system panel beside me dimmed, returning to a passive state. No alarms. No warnings. Just a quiet, balanced network doing exactly what it was designed to do. The water features around the pool remained off. The surface was still. No reflections of chaos anymore. Just a calm mirror under the late afternoon sky. A few people began to leave. Slowly at first. Then more steadily. Conversations turned into plans. Plans turned into exits. The party had fully transformed into something else. A lesson. A cost. A memory that would not fade quickly. Patricia finally spoke, but not to me. She addressed the group, her voice lower than before, stripped of command. She said they would organize a meeting. She said they would find a way to manage this together. The words sounded different now. Not orders. Not rules. Just attempts to hold something together after it had already broken. No one responded right away. Because everyone understood the same thing at the same time. This did not start as a big problem. It started small. A decision that seemed easy. A boundary that seemed flexible. Authority used casually. And now the scale of it was something none of them could ignore. I turned toward the exit path, taking one last look at the space. Everything was quiet. Controlled. Stable. Exactly as it should have been from the beginning. As I walked away, my phone buzzed one final time. Ownership status confirmed. Oversight authority retained. System priority unchanged. I slipped it back into my pocket without breaking stride. Behind me, the neighborhood would spend months, maybe years, adjusting to what had happened in a single afternoon. Ahead of me, nothing had changed at all. Because from the start, I was never just another resident. I was the one who built the system they thought they could bend. And now they understood what it meant when it refused. The days after did not explode. They tightened. Quietly. Systematically. The kind of pressure that does not shout but reshapes everything beneath it. By Monday morning, the first official notices were delivered. Not just emails. Certified letters. Formal language. Payment structures. Compliance deadlines. The neighborhood that once argued over lawn height and mailbox colors was now dealing with financial schedules measured in years. Patricia called the emergency HOA meeting that same evening. Attendance was the highest it had ever been. Every chair filled. People stood along the walls. No one came to socialize. They came for answers. Patricia looked different standing at the front. Not weaker. Not smaller. Just real. The tone was gone. The authority that once controlled the room had been replaced with something far less comfortable. Accountability. She began explaining the situation. The system. The liability chain. The agreement she had signed. Her voice stayed steady, but every word carried weight now. When she finished, the room did not react immediately. Because everyone already understood. This was not a debate. It was a consequence. A man raised his hand and asked the only question that mattered. How did this ever happen? Patricia paused. Just for a second. Then she answered honestly. A decision made without permission. A rule bent because it felt harmless. Authority used casually. And no understanding of what sat behind the system they were using. That answer settled deeper than any argument could have. Because it was simple. And it was true. Over the next few weeks, the neighborhood changed in ways that could not be undone. Cars stayed in driveways longer. Contractors came and went. Financial advisors became regular conversations. People adjusted spending. Plans shifted. Vacations canceled. Renovations paused. Every household carried a version of the same burden. Structured. Calculated. Unavoidable. Patricia stepped down from her position within a month. Not forced. Not publicly demanded. She just announced it during a short meeting and handed over responsibilities. No one argued. Because leadership meant something different now. It meant understanding consequences before making decisions. And that standard had already been set. The pool remained closed for a while. Not permanently. Just until everything aligned again. When it finally reopened, it looked exactly the same. Clean. Controlled. Quiet. But the feeling was different. No one crossed boundaries anymore. No one assumed access. Every rule was followed. Not out of fear. Out of understanding. I returned to the space one afternoon weeks later. The water was still. The system was running perfectly. A few residents sat nearby. Calm. Respectful. There were no parties. No loud music. Just a normal afternoon. The way it should have always been. One of the neighbors recognized me and gave a small nod. Not friendly. Not hostile. Just aware. That was enough. I checked the panel briefly. Everything balanced. Every line stable. No excess. No strain. Exactly as designed. As I turned to leave, my phone buzzed once more. A final report. Long-term projections confirmed. Recovery timeline established. System integrity preserved. I did not need to read further. Because the outcome had never been uncertain. It was always going to end this way. Not with destruction. But with correction on a scale no one expected. A small decision had triggered a massive chain reaction. And now the entire neighborhood carried the result. Not because the system was unfair. But because it was precise. And precision does not ignore mistakes. It defines them. I walked away without looking back. Because there was nothing left to fix. Only something that had finally been understood.